Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the January 21st, 2020 Curriculum Committee meeting for the Radnor Township School District. First item on the agenda are introductions and administrative remarks. Mr. Bechtel.
Actually, today, Mr. Dukevich is going to be presenting the administrative remarks.
Good evening, everybody. I wanted to begin by letting you know that we were the proud recipient of a PA Smart Grant this weekend. We were made aware on the 17th of January that Radnor Township will be receiving $35,000 as part of a state initiative. The PA Smart Grant is awarded to local education agencies in their schools with limited to no computer science offerings. The grants are used to train teachers and educators on how to implement CS experiences inside and outside of classrooms. Our Radner plan is we're going to use some of those funds to do some administrative training at the Franklin Institute on brain-based learning, and the training is focused on neuroscience and pedagogical research, and also encompasses elements of STEM integration and computer science. That'll happen this June. Also, the larger part of the grant is intended for intensive training for a cohort of elementary teachers that will earn them an endorsement on integrative STEM education. And this would be a great movement in the direction we want to go in. I want to thank the Wayne Elementary librarian, Sue Dahlstrom, and our instructional technology integration specialist, Libby Kornman. Their efforts and time were instrumental in helping us to secure this grant. So thank you very much to Sue and Libby. Also, part of this grant will provide training through the DCIU on development of a K-8 STEM and computer science framework that will help us make decisions going forward. So we're very excited about that. Wanted to make note of some upcoming events here at Radnor. So next week is District-wide International Week. Students from all 5 Radnor Township school districts will participate in activities dedicated to the celebration of diversity, culture, and traditions. Each school's multicultural committee from the PTOs is sponsoring and organizing the activities, which will expose students to unique lifestyles and landscapes from around the world. Exciting stuff coming to all of our students. On February 6th, the Radnor Township is prepared for an all-district orchestra concert. So all music departments are inviting the community to performances by the elementary, middle, and high school orchestras at Radnor High School. This will be again February 6th, beginning at 7:30 p.m. And finally, the Radnor Educational Foundation 25th Anniversary Jubilee is scheduled for February 8th from 7 to 11 p.m. Obviously, the REF Foundation is a huge supporter of the entire district, and this will be their 25th Anniversary Jubilee at Pong on Saturday, February 8th from 7 to 11 p.m. Some exciting times will include hors d'oeuvres, cocktails, a DJ and dancing, live music, and silent auctions featuring one-of-a-kind packages. So again, funds raised at this event will support grant requests at the district at large and all 5 Radnor schools, I should say. So great things coming ahead the next month for Radnor Township. And that's all for me.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Goldman, I believe, has a question.
Yeah, about the STEM grant. I noticed some of the other districts that received them have put them on the front pages of their website. Is there any plan potentially to advertise it? Because I think there's a lot of interest in STEM in this community, so maybe it's worth putting that out there. It came from our state. It's
Absolutely.
going to some interesting things.
Absolutely. We'll be working with Mr. Petiti to get something on the website. But it's funny, we just found out on the 17th that we have our first training with a cohort next Friday, the 31st. So it's a quick turnaround. But
Great. Well,
we will definitely do that.
congratulations. It sounds
Great.
exciting.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That brings us to public comment. Is there any public comment at this time? All right, seeing none, that brings us to the approval of the minutes from the December meeting. Committee, any problems, comments on the meeting, meeting minutes? Welcome, Jess. That's all right. You're getting even more in. All right, that brings us to the first agenda item, which are the board action items for our business meeting next week. Mr. Bechtel?
All right, so we have a couple action items that we'd be asked to move forward. First, we have a new club, a ping pong club at the high school. We do have the ping pong tables, so this is a club that students are interested in participating in. Mr. Bussa will be the faculty sponsor for this. We'll also be asking the board for approval for anticipated overnight student trip to Camp Canadensis, which is our annual trip. And lastly, we have approval of agreements with both Drexel University and Westchester University for us to host student teachers. We do have Mr. Stitzel, our Director of HR, here, so if there are any questions about the agreements, then we can certainly call him up.
I do believe some of the members of the committee, just because we'd never seen those before, had questions about them. So do you want to ask anything specific?
I typed these earlier and just forgot to put them on my paper, so I just want to ask you.
Not a problem.
So are these the only two universities that we have student teachers from, or these are just the two that wanted contracts in place?
I was under the belief when I got here that we had them in place.
Yeah.
But talking to people after we got these two, we don't. So these two will be on, and we'll be actually contacting the other universities to get some in place as well. Because if they were put on prior to my getting here, nobody knows exactly where they are.
Got it, okay. And then, just out of curiosity, and not because, they both of them kind of reference the potential for either compensation to the district or to the mentoring teachers. And I just wondered if that's something that gets negotiated separately.
Typically, in the
On the-
past, the universities have either given partial tuition credit towards teachers.
Okay.
They could have given a free course, or they may pay a nominal fee of $250 or so to the cooperating teacher.
Okay, okay. I think that was, and I wanted to know kind of why they were coming in now instead of at the beginning of the school year, and I gather it's because they were.
Yeah, apparently we didn't have them approved prior to my getting here, and these two universities wanted to update theirs. So when they came in, we reviewed them. We ran them by legal, they're fine, and then when we started looking for others,
Got it.
they weren't there.
Okay, well, thanks for taking
Sure.
proactive steps on that.
So when we had our pre-meeting, I just want to mention that we asked about that, and Mr. Bechtold assured us that it had gone past our solicitor. So I was also surprised because I'd never seen anything like that before either, and I don't know. So I didn't want to get bogged down in it. It's like, okay.
Yeah, the district did not want to enter in an agreement without running it through the board.
Yeah, thank you.
Apparently it's
Anybody else? Yeah.
Apparently it's a trend.
Is that right?
I was hearing that was a trend or sort of an upcoming trend that such agreements are gonna become kind of the norm.
I did talk to somebody else, another director of HR, and they kind of alluded to that as well, but I don't know for certain.
Yeah. Thanks.
I just did not, for you, Mr. Stitzel, I just had another question on the action items. The Camp Canadensis, seeing that on the action items list reminded me that several months ago when we approved the Sandy Hill trip, we talked about at the business meeting, as the curriculum cycle is getting a second look under your leadership, that perhaps field trips might be something to incorporate into the curricular review, because no judgment on whether the trips are good or bad by this comment, but what was their original purpose? Are they still meeting their purpose? Is the investment realized by doing them? That kind of thing. So seeing this reminded me of that, and I wanted to put that forward as a mention.
Thank you.
Okay, so are we in agreement to put these forward for the business? Okay, good, thank you. Do you want to go in the order on the agenda? Is that the way we want to proceed?
Yes.
Okay. So that brings us to the Radnor Middle School math placement criteria.
All right, and I will call up Dr. Kearney, Mr. Scansella, and Mrs. Kindred to come forward and present. While they're coming up, So one of the things that we looked at when we started to pull the math vertical team together is one of the areas that we thought that we could enhance would be the scheduling timeline at the middle school and the high school. Doing so would provide administrators and guidance counselors additional time to address scheduling conflicts for individual students and balance class sections in each building. It directly benefits our students and our teachers. It provides our teachers advance notice by moving up the scheduling timeline as to the course they're teaching. It's really daunting if you're a teacher at the middle school or high school and you've never taught a course before to be given a course late in the summer, because it really cuts down the amount of time, and our teachers really do a great job of prepping when they teach a new course. So our math vertical team looked at what our current placement criteria was. It's a good practice to look at what our criteria is on a fairly regular basis. And I just have to thank our math vertical team. The teachers put a ton of effort in, Dr. Kearney, and all their hard work to date. So they've really worked a lot to get us to this point. So at that time, I'll turn it over.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who may not know or watching at home, Ms. Kindred's an 8th grade math teacher and also the chair of the vertical team. And Mr. Scansell is a 6th grade math teacher and was involved in both the discussions about placement criteria at the middle school and placement criteria from 5th to 6th grade. So when Mr. Bechtold had talked to us and he talked to the vertical team about the need to come up with a little bit of an earlier timeline for placing students into math, we took a look at what criteria or what data might be available to students by that point. And we also took a close look at what is the experience of those students who are currently placed in our math courses. So we identified students who are correctly placed in our math courses and a few students who might be struggling in our current math placements, and looked at the data, the profile of these students, to help inform the criteria decisions that you see here. It's pretty common for the vertical team to have conversations about what is the experience of students going from grade level to grade level, what are we seeing, how might we improve their experience. So the conversation about placement was not necessarily a new one, but we thought that the practice of looking at the data for current students was one that would be useful for us, and I think that the team feels comfortable with the data that we have here. So to talk first about a brief overview of the placements within the middle school, 6th to 7th, and then 7th to 8th, you'll see that we are suggesting that we use common assessments that we have available up in the time of placement. We feel like this gives a snapshot of students' performance over time, certainly aligned with the core curriculum, as well as the MAP test, which is a test that's already administered to our middle school students as a standardized assessment to give us a sort of an external measure of students' knowledge of math, but also perhaps readiness for a change in their course level. We think 90% on the common assessments and 90th percentile on the MAP is a solid profile for students who could be successful in those different courses. And this is based on the students that we looked at. However, recognizing that the MAP may be one test on one day, we do have a little bit of a cushion for parents to override if they score between the 87th and 89th percentile on that MAP test, particularly there for 6th to 7th grade.
Mr. Kearney,
Yes.
forgive me for interrupting.
Sure.
I just want to make sure that I'm following along properly. You're on this chart, correct?
We are.
And the heading on one of them says criteria used in 2018-2019, which was last school year. And the next column says criteria starting in 2019-2020. So is what you're reviewing, just to make sure I'm following, you're not proposing something for the 2021 school year. You're reviewing for, can you just?
So that's
I'll-
what they're
yeah,
going to
clarify.
use this year to place kids this year for next year. So he's saying they're going to use it this year. This is
Right.
what they're going to use.
You're gonna use what's in the right-hand column
Right.
to inform how you're gonna place for the next school year.
For next school year, that's correct.
Okay.
So 2018 to 2019 column is currently what's in place and has been in place for a few years. The right-hand column, starting for this school year, 2019 to 2020, is to place students. We're going to use it this year to place students for next year into these different math levels.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you, sorry about that.
Sorry, just to jump in, on the back side of that sheet, you will notice that they will be presenting later
Right.
a separate 5th to 6th grade that will not be in place for next year. It'll be in for the following year as well. So just the nuance of, you'll see 1920 on the first side that they're talking about now, but then 2021 on the following one, and that is purposeful, and that they will explain that.
Yeah. So that first row there, we're talking about students from 6th grade course 1 to 7th honors 2-3. That's a change in course level primarily. If we're looking to accelerate a student, Our practice is that students will demonstrate mastery in an evidence of mastery exam over the content that they would be, of the content they would be accelerated over. So if a student's going to skip a course, we want to make sure that they've got the knowledge and the skills, or at least the core knowledge and skills from that course that they would otherwise miss. So that we have requirements here, and the criteria here is for students to demonstrate that they are a potential candidate for acceleration, which again is the 90% on the chapter test as well as 90th percentile on the map. And then they need to demonstrate mastery on the evidence of mastery exam as we have been doing in years past. So that's not really a change. To give you some sense, it's more common for a student to make a change of course level, not huge numbers of students, but a larger number of students, than for a student to accelerate over a course, particularly as they get into higher grades, because by that point, a lot of the needs and strengths have shown themselves and students and adjustments have already been made, which I think is worth mentioning, particularly within the middle school, if students are demonstrating a need for adjustments and placement because there seems to be a pretty significant mismatch. The middle school is monitoring that, they're paying attention to that, they're having conversations with parents, and they will make some adjustments even during the school year and certainly from one year to the next. So I don't know if either of you have anything you'd like to add about either the process or the criteria. Okay. So maybe we can take a few questions, if there are any, on the proposed criteria for 6th to 7th to 7th to 8th, and we'll talk about after that the 5th to 6th grade, because that's a little bit different than the first page.
I was just going to comment on the, looking at this first one, it would strike me that the common assessment, the chapter tests, an average of those chapter tests, are a better indication and a better, I'm putting myself as a parent going through this with my children in another district, gives a little bit better of assessment than waiting to the end of year, putting it all in the end of year course assessment. It seems like that's just a little bit more of a fair assessment for that student.
We thought that was, looking at the performance over time was a good indicator.
Okay, does anyone have specific questions on this? I think you
Yeah,
had something.
and just so I don't forget to say it, I know when Dr. Murray redid some of this, and she actually had meetings with parents and talked about how we were restructuring the math program, and somewhere she presented it, but I actually think it's on one of our websites, how you can actually, or maybe it's in the program of studies, there's a flow chart that shows how your child moves, because I think for a lot of people, just hearing course level and advance and acceleration doesn't.
This what you're thinking?
Yes, that's exactly
That's
what
in
it
the
is.
program of studies. And
Okay, so
on page 18, I think.
So
is
yeah,
what
I think
you're
it'll
thinking.
help people to recognize that the flow chart, thank you, page 18 of the program of studies. But if to the extent there are footnotes on that, if you make sure they get updated to reflect this, I think that'd be helpful for people. Not everybody is looking for this stuff. A lot of parents don't know about it till they get a letter that says your child can override if you want, and they say, what's that? I don't even know what you're talking about. So I think it's helpful for people who are at least proactively looking or want to understand it to look there. Can I just ask, because I'm sure you'll get this follow-up question, maybe we can just cut it off. It's an average of the chapter tests that they've taken by the end of the second trimester, or but at what point in the year? Just because you're going to get people who argue with my kid took one more test, they'd hit a 90%, and.
Through April, it looks like.
Okay.
If we're looking to make the placement by May, it'll probably be the common assessments into April.
Okay.
February, a little early. Okay.
End of February, okay. And then the Iowa Stay 9 just isn't available at that point? Is that why we're switching, or you just think it's not as good a indicator?
Was it last year or the year before? I think it was the year before. We gave it earlier.
Okay.
And students just did not do as well on it, and we ended up giving it a second time at the end of the year again. So we just kind of said, okay, let's take that out. It's not as valid earlier in the year.
Okay.
So let's look at other options.
Okay, that's great. No, and
It's-
I really appreciate that you looked at all that.
I think you're saying they're not giving Iowa at all anymore. Like they're
Yeah, so that's actually good news
Yeah.
for all the parents who
They're
are frustrated
looking
by
at
extra testing.
minimizing how many tests,
That's
and
wonderful.
we're still getting the data we need by doing that. Okay.
Okay, and the MAP test, because I know there are certain standardized tests we have parents kind of balk at, and a lot of them try to opt out. The MAP test is not one of those that a lot of parents are opting out of?
No.
No.
So
Okay,
the-
good. Okay, perfect. Great. I just didn't want to have a group of people then saying you have a flaw in your criteria. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you've clearly thought through a lot of this and worked through all the levels.
Anybody else? Andrew? Amy, did you have anything on the math?
Yeah, I'm looking at page 16
I made a
and
note of that.
maybe just a generational thing or whatever, but I can't see that.
We
So
can't.
I know I'm sort of combining two agenda items here, but that really is just colors and boxes to me. And I'm not sure, because I was so confused, and I know there are other people who are not on this committee but sit on the board who were thinking by the way this page is laid out, that there is potentially, because we have a history of this in our district, you guys have been around long enough to know this, the shifting criteria, it seems to be very fluid, and maybe it hasn't been in terms of, I mean, for as long as I've been around, not just on the board, but as a parent in the district, it seems that the criteria to wave into math or accelerate has changed quite often. And I mean, you probably remember conversations to this effect in
Yeah.
previous years. So my question is, the confusion around this page, I'm still a little bit confused. It says criteria starting in 2019, 2020, but you then said that this criteria had been in place for a few years. Yet in the column to the left, there are some differences in the criteria, and that was just 1 year prior. So it could be, it's maybe a long day for me, but I'm still trying to figure out, when you look at this, a stronger explanation for it, and is this information something that belongs in the student handbook as well? Because if there is a parent who wants to access this information about overrides or whatever, I'm not sure it's in the handbook, right? I can't see it, so I'm asking because I can't read it. Is it in there?
It's a lot more legible online.
Yeah.
You can blow it up on your screen.
Wait, do you mean the program of studies or the handbook?
The program of studies,
Okay.
yeah.
So you mean the stuff?
No, I threw a bunch of different things at you. It was just a
And
stream
I'll
of
try to
consciousness.
clarify.
Okay.
That middle column where it says criteria used in 2018, 2019, that's the one that's been in place for a few years.
Okay,
The criteria that's in the column that says starting in 2019, 2020, that's the criteria that we're trying to explain today and will begin this year for the first time to place students for next year, for next school year. So the criteria in the far right column there, we have not used it previously, but this is what we're moving to for this year to make decisions for next year.
so the decisions for next year will in fact be different from the decisions you used for coming into this school year?
Correct.
Okay.
In this way, these were for this year, this is for next year.
Yeah, got it. Got it.
Do you know how long the current criteria, so the middle column used in 1819, do you know how long that's been in place? Or-
I don't.
I think they've been in place since
Re-
you put in the new
I was
math
gonna say,
program.
It's been in place for at least 4 years, and it was based on, our previous math program and scores, and it was just carried over when we brought Math and Focus in. So we kind of thought it was time, we've had Math and Focus for 3-4 years, let's look at how the kids have been doing, let's relook at the criteria and make decisions based on Math and Focus criteria, not a program that has been in place prior to that.
So that's what's sort of driving, that's the change for going into the school year. It's timing, and it's also sort of a post-analysis of since Math and Focus has been in place. In case anybody's wondering why it's shifting again, that's what you would boil it down to, those two reasons.
Yes.
Okay. Does it belong in the student handbook or no? I mean, I
So
don't know how to.
this chart, as small as it is, with the new criteria, is in the program of studies on that page. That's what Ms. Dunn was referring to. It is also much more user-friendly online because you can enlarge it and look into the parts that you want to look at a little bit more closely. So, after this meeting, we're going to post the updated version online.
Okay.
Wait, so you're saying we're going to get a enlarged version in the actual program of studies, or is it going to be the one that we see here?
I believe that'll be the one you see there. Online, it'll be available, and it'll be a little easier to read.
Okay, so the larger one is online.
We're gonna
'Cause
get a
most-
fold-out poster of it.
No, because remember, Lydia, most people don't get the program of studies on paper the school board members do, but everybody else just has it online.
Have it
So
online,
It's
so they can
very
read it.
user-friendly there.
Okay.
One of the things that we could do, that I know that we did with the high school program of studies, was have direct links that are embedded in the document and then direct people to that page in the curriculum department.
So, in the past, math placement has been occasionally rocky in the middle school. I don't need to tell you guys. So this to me seems well thought out, and this seems like it's very clear and should run smoothly. Do you anticipate anything that could trip us up with this?
I don't think so. I think it's very clear. We looked at data, we looked at students, we looked at them over time, how they performed in multiple years. So I think the fact that, we did a longevity of how the students have been doing, and we looked at multiple students, more than just one or two, and we looked at their data, I think it was well thought out and very valid.
Using the good data that we already had, I think it was just sort of fine tuning what we thought would get us the best result. I mean, we have all this data. We don't have to over-test. We already have enough information to make informed decisions.
Oh, I think one thing we should point out, I notice we've kind of taken the emphasis away from what they would call teacher recommendation or the teacher override piece.
Well,
Can
the
you just speak
teacher
to that?
recommendation is not part of our current criteria, so it's not taking it away. As I said earlier, there are conversations in the middle school about students' performance in math class, on a regular basis and certainly as needed. So teacher input is going to be part of a conversation about where a student's correctly placed, both with the child as well as with their parents. So although it's not part of the formal criteria, and it has not been, it is certainly a part of a student's experience in their math classes at the middle school.
No,
And elementary school, for that
I
matter.
said that wrong. Of
Yeah.
course, it's embedded in this. It used to be that there was a separate, the teacher could say, oh, I think they should be in this course. I think that was from 5th grade going into 6th, and that occasionally caused a little bit of misunderstanding. But, so we don't, and I see that it's not here, and I'm
I
pleased.
actually-
It takes the pressure off the teachers.
I actually went to a number of the math, when they switched to Math and Focus, and that was actually one of the things they talked about, because there was some anxiety among parents, and they said, no, this is not about any kind of favoritism, and I think somewhere there was an argument, too, that it took pressure off teachers, when parents might pressure them, but that, I think, was specifically removed when Math and Focus went into place.
Yeah. I have a question for you guys. Are you really pleased with Math and Focus?
I am, as
Okay.
great. Thank you for letting us weigh in on this as well. We appreciate that. I really like the program. I think it allows students to dig deeper. It has a lot of opportunity for extension. It has a lot of opportunity for students who need remediation. And I think it builds a good foundation of deeper thinking. And I think that's the piece of Math and Focus that maybe wasn't there before in our last program. Just really building sort of that discourse in the math, the discussion of what everything means and describing your process and finding the connections between different processes. So from the 6th grade perspective, kids coming, and as we see them this year, more and more kids have had it for longer. So now we're seeing students
Yeah,
who've had it
that'll
for 3 or 4 years, and the connections are happening much faster. So from that perspective, I see that it has been successful.
Okay. All right.
And from the 8th grade perspective, I teach more of the algebra and the geometry. So the students are being exposed to algebra concepts much earlier than they were in, previous series. So I think coming up, when as they've been successful in the Math and Focus, they're becoming more successful in the Algebra 1 and seeing stronger foundation and the problem solving. A lot of the students in the honors and accelerated levels are able to pick up information more quickly than maybe they had in previous years.
Okay, so the report back is that expenditure on this, which was a heavy expenditure, was worth it. That's what you're seeing. Okay. Well, thank you for
As long as you
sharing
mentioned
that.
that you were updating, because I did pull it up online, so thank you. I'm, going like this.
Oh, there, that's helpful.
I don't know if it's still this way, but I do remember what you were referring to, Lydia, about how parents see changes in criteria and they sort of go wonky over it. For, again, no judgment on it, but change. Just consideration, maybe, I think your rationale for doing it sounds very reasonable. It's based on timing for placement, and it's based on data that you've collected over with a new program to inform this new criteria. Maybe it's worth a footnote or something. I don't know. If it just to sort of, it doesn't seem as arbitrary. It might keep some questions coming at you, maybe in abeyance, because people see the rationale in advance. Just food for thought. Maybe you want to put that out there and do an asterisk and explain that this is new criteria and this is what the rationale for the new criteria is, and see if that's helpful. Because there were questions just among a number of us, so maybe that's some indication of what could potentially be coming your way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we don't expect that this will eliminate all questions about math placement. They come up each year and they will likely continue. But on the back is also the result, or a summary of the result of the work that we're looking at from 5th grade to 6th grade math placement. And as Mr. Bechtold pointed out here, this is a little different from the chart that we just looked at, because although it identifies the current criteria, the proposed change here would not be for next year. It would be for the following school year. So here we took a look to see the placement from math from 5th to 6th grade. And in the conversations that included both 5th grade teachers and 6th grade teachers, as well as administrators, we considered similar to as we did at the middle school. What criteria is available to us? What do we think is reliable for helping to make these decisions about placement? And then also, how do we make sure that we have a comprehensive look at students and their performance and what we think would be the most appropriate placement for them as they transition from elementary school to middle school? This is a particular topic of interest for parents. They're coming from 3 different buildings into a brand new place, so there's a lot of transitions that happen with the change to middle school. And math placement, for the first time, is leveled in a way that it hasn't been before. So this is of particular interest to not just students, but parents as well. So we thought it would be prudent for this one, not necessarily to make this change for next year, including because some of the criteria is already taken, like grade 4 PSSA exams, but also because the change in the process is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. So what we did was we created a matrix where we identified these 5 points of criteria. And then we started by thinking, okay, so what might be an appropriate cutoff for students to earn points for each of those criteria in order to identify those students who would be correctly placed and not. And we ran the data from students from the past 3 years through this matrix and took a look at to what extent did it really group those students, particularly from this current school year, who we felt were correctly placed in their math placements and those who may be struggling or may be misplaced. We adjusted the matrix, we adjusted the criteria, we adjusted the points, and over the series of a few meetings, we got it to a place where we think that it pretty accurately groups students who were appropriately placed in their current math classes and would be useful criteria to us after adjusting it, with also the possibility of an override for those students who might be on the border between making the criteria outright and those who it might be a little bit more uncertain. So our plan is to use the existing criteria to place students into 6th grade math this year, but also simultaneously and behind the scenes, gather the information on those students using the existing matrix and see, with another year's worth of data, how well did it work, and did it work as intended, and do we need to make any adjustments before we would go live with it for the following school year. So that's our thinking there. For students, again, similarly to accelerate into over a course, they would have to demonstrate first that they would be appropriately placed in the upper level, the honors level of that 6th grade math course, and then similar to before, they would have to demonstrate mastery on evidence of mastery of tests the way that they would for 6th to 7th, 7th to 8th, and also if we were to accelerate students at a younger grade level than that as well. So we want to make the committee as well as the community aware that we are looking to change this criteria not for next year but the following year. And some of the data points, specifically the grade 4 PSSA that would be considered as part of math placement, is something that current 4th grade students will be taking in the spring. And that would be a point, one of 5 areas of criteria used for the following year. Speaking of teacher input, our current criteria does not include input from the 5th grade teachers as a part of what we would look at for placement of students. The matrix that we created does include observable characteristics, which would be based on the teacher's observations. We have identified a few of those teacher's observations of students. Now, the preponderance of the data would come from more quantitative sources, But there is a little bit of room for teacher input based on what they're seeing the students demonstrating in their classes over the course of the first half or first 2 to 3 quarters of the year.
Do you have any more remarks about math placement to?
One other one that I thought I would just mention here, that's not on this chart here, but we're also having some conversations. We do have an opportunity for students who are currently in 4th grade to place into Course 1 as 5th grade students. This is something that's existed for years now. Typically, there's an evidence of mastery test, which you've heard about, that we have a large number of students taking, but very, very few number of students actually demonstrate readiness to accelerate over 5th grade math into 6th grade Course 1, particularly as a 5th grade student. So we are having some conversations at this point among the administrators about, how do we want to handle that? How do we want to handle that? And do we want to take a different approach to those students who would first sit for the evidence of mastery test and the criteria for students to place into an accelerated Course 1 as a 5th grade student? So I'm going to mention that because we're talking about placement criteria here, but we're still having those conversations this year.
Okay. All right. I'm curious to know the teacher-student perspective on any of this. Do you have any comments that jump out at you?
I like that the matrix includes observable characteristics because I think that's a quality that goes unnoticed a lot. And I think that the MAP score, with my experience with the MAPS test, I think that if there's a way to weight the matrix such that if you score high on the MAPS test, it shows that you are like above and beyond. Because I feel like the kids that do really well on that test show that they are like really accelerated, whereas like if you don't do as well, it doesn't mean that you're like bad at math. I feel like that test shouldn't be considered on the same level as like other grade level exams because I don't know, I feel like it's a lot harder, and that's just was my experience with it. But I'm glad to see the observable characteristics, and I'm just interested to know if there's any way to weight the different aspects of the matrix to like by level of importance.
So when we worked on the matrix, and Mr. Scansella was very, very much involved in helping to develop this, we did take a look at the weightings for each one of those criteria, and each one's assigned points, and we had to identify cutoffs for what points would be appropriate for each score. So we looked at students' performance on the MAP test and tried to adjust that weighting so it did similar to what you're saying, identified those students who were definitely ready for whatever level of course it would be that they'd be placed into, either the honors or then possible acceleration, and without unduly penalizing students who might not do as well. There would be opportunity for them to demonstrate readiness based on the other criteria.
All right, thank you. And Mrs. McMiniman?
I'm very appreciative.
Oh, your mic. Yeah.
I'm actually very appreciative of all the work that everybody put into this because I think it makes it very clear and concise, and I think it will eliminate questions because math has always been probably the hardest area to schedule, and from the 5th to 6th grade, and if you look at the 6th to the 8th grade, I think it really settles that down, and you had brought that up. I think it's going to eliminate a lot of the gray area, a lot of those questions that probably were very repetitive and not necessary in the past. So I'm very appreciative of it as being part of that whole process too, and different kinds of scheduling it. I think it makes it very clear and concise.
All right, well, thank you for that input. Committee members, any other questions on math?
No, I actually want to say to the curriculum, especially since you guys are newer with this, that I really appreciate you recognizing that scheduling has been an ongoing challenge at the middle school, and that figuring out ways to help the teachers do that placement earlier, and if it requires adjusting some criteria, I think that I really appreciate the proactive step and that you guys jumped right on it to get involved. It's great.
Are you comfortable? I also really want to second that and thank you for especially taking on the lead of the vertical team. And it's really important work, and I know sometimes it's like additional work for you. So we also really appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise with us. So, and of course, Jim, always great work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for leading the charge.
They're great to work with, and the whole team was very diligent and thoughtful about their work with this criteria. They took it very seriously and did nice work.
It shows.
It shows.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very concise. I appreciate it. All right, shall we move on to the instructional calendar? Are we
Yes.
ready for that? So we're going to be discussing the 2020-2021 instructional calendar debate. Tune in.
All right. So the calendar committee met in December to discuss options for this year's calendar. And based on the feedback from the committee, you have two calendars in front of you, both a pre-Labor Day and a post-Labor Day calendar. Looking at both calendars, one thing that you'll notice that is consistent on both calendars, but is also a change that I'll point out from our current calendar, is the movement of one of our teacher in service days from December 23rd to April 5th, which is commonly known as Easter Monday, and that was something that was brought up by the committee that extends spring break by 1 day, and so that is something that I wanted to point out to the committee. I will also point out that on the post-Labor Day calendar that you have in front of you, graduation is a week later. It is June 16th versus June 9th. One of the things that we are required to do is hit 180 instructional days and 990 hours of instruction in a school year, and by having Labor Day fall where it is, we could not keep graduation on the 9th if we start after Labor Day. In both calendars, you have 4 built-in snow days, as we've had this year, and the 4 built-in snow days came, we took a look at the past 10 years last year when we did this and saw how many instructional days we had snow days on, and it came out to like 3.8 or 3.9 days, so 4 days of snow days were built into both the pre- and post-Labor Day calendars. As an administrative team, we took the feedback from the calendar committee and looked at a couple different options to present the committee. The first option is to start school after Labor Day, which is traditionally what we've done here in Radner. And what I'll also add is it's traditional for Delaware County. And so there's a lot of schools in Delaware County that also start after Labor Day. The second option would be to start school before Labor Day for next school year. So this was based off of when Labor Day falls and the end of the school year. Also, there are a number of standardized exams, such as AP exams, Keystone exams, and PSSAs that fall during the months of April and May. And these are cumulative exams that teachers and students work very hard on. So looking at the fact that you can have essentially 4 days prior to those exams or 4 days after those exams, that gives another reason to look at this before Labor Day calendar. And additionally, there are several school districts, even locally, that are making the move based on when the calendar is falling to go to before Labor Day. Districts that have already put forth their calendar locally: Garnet Valley, Great Valley, Haverford, Phoenixville, Rose Tree Media, Tredeffer and Easttown, and Westchester have all gone to a before Labor Day calendar for next year. And again, this is based off of when Labor Day is falling. So option number 2 would be to start school before Labor Day for the 2020-2021 school year. A third option that we discussed as administrative team was to start school after Labor Day next year. But because of when Labor Day falls the following year, which is essentially the same date, it's another late Labor Day, to commit to starting before Labor Day in 2021-2022. The feedback from the calendar committee when we met in December was they thought that it was too late for us to go and move and go to a before Labor Day start, and they had concerns about people with vacation plans or beach homes that had booked these in advance, and so by recognizing the fact that in 2021, 2022, Labor Day will also fall late, and take into consideration that we need to adequately provide notice to the community, option number 3 was created. After these options, there was feedback that I received from a board member after these went out in the packets on Friday regarding a potential fourth option, which would be, if you're going to already suggest option number 2, which is before Labor Day, and you're going to suggest option number 3, which is before Labor Day next year, would option number 4 make sense with having a before Labor Day this year and a before Labor Day for next year? So I would pose that to the committee as a possible fourth option for you to consider. But these are the options that we looked at, and we open up to the committee for a discussion.
All right. I know there were a lot of questions, so I'm going to, you want to go first, Amy?
Have a spot on my back or something? Mr. Bechtel, it was Phoenixville, Great Valley, Upper Darby, Garnet Valley, Rose Tree, Haverford.
It was Garnet Valley,
Uh-huh.
Great Valley, Haverford, Phoenixville, Rose Tree Media, Tredeffrin Easttown, and Westchester.
And not Upper Darby.
Not Upper Darby.
Not Upper Darby.
No, Upper Darby is going before. They typically do. I spoke to their.
There are other districts. I was on Marple's website today, and they do not typically pass until February. There are other districts around us that are not on this list that have not passed their calendars yet. That will probably either be January or February. But what I noted was there are currently 3 in Delaware County that all went after Labor Day that are now moving to before Labor Day this year. Again, this is a regional thing coming from Lancaster County. When I was a teacher, majority of the school districts there, if not all the school districts, start and a before Labor Day start. So this is certainly something that has deep roots and traditions, and there's very many passionate people. I think the fact the way the calendar's falling this year is causing even schools that have these deep roots in a post-Labor Day calendar to look at and consider a pre-Labor Day calendar based on when it's Labor Day is falling.
And I know I spoke to the Wallingford Swarthmore board president today, or yesterday, to get a little bit more information. They're having the very same conversation this week. So it's my sense, and if I said, which way do you think your group is leaning? And I do think that we'll see the majority of Delaware County districts, and I think Chester County tends to start before Labor Day pretty routinely. So I vote for option number 4. If that's what you're asking. It's my, and I want to hear more about this, but it's my impression that this decision is being made not just simply because of how the calendar falls. There's a real instructional rationale to it. Do you want to maybe give some background on that for those of us who aren't on the calendar committee?
So as administrators, when we talk about the standardized tests that take place, our teachers put in a significant amount of time preparing students for PSSAs, elementary and middle school level, Keystone exams, AP exams at the high school level, and our students do well. But if I would believe that if I'd ask any teacher, would you like 4 days more prior to the exam to prep the students or 4 days after the exam are over? I think that you would see that most educators would say it makes a lot more sense educationally to have those days prior to those high stakes standardized exams where both teacher evaluations and school rankings and students, their performance is out there for the public. So I would say that those things would really weigh into the factor for many educators to say, give me 4 days with the kids where I know that I can work with them prior to having the exams.
I think our teachers would say, and I remember feeling this as a teacher myself, and this is a topic that I'm very torn on because I have my feelings where I feel as an educator and my feelings where I feel as a parent, and it's interesting. As a teacher, I was the product of a district that always started before Labor Day, and I always found those days more valuable, those 4 days before Labor Day, much more valuable than 4 days in June. It was just a more valuable use of time. As a parent, I like my kids starting after Labor Day. I mean, I wish they did. I like they do. I believe what we're faced with this year and next year, and all the districts are faced with, and why there are districts that are changing, is because of the uniqueness of how late it is the next 2 years, and that's why this is such a pertinent topic. But I would say it's beyond just the tests. I would say that it's also just about the value of days at the beginning of the year versus value of days at the end of the year in June.
Right, and isn't there something to be, I mean, I'd also like very much to hear from another educator over here, just because from where I sit, I mean, I really feel like this seems like it should be driven, not exclusively, but if I'm being honest, weighted by the educational directive. You know, what is in the best interest of delivering, you know, the most meaningful educational experience for the school year for our students, and I think there's even more potentially to the testing. I've heard the AP situation bandied about. I know Garnet Valley did a very extensive rationale to their community on why they changed their times, and they referenced the AP exams, and that starting late puts the advanced placement teachers behind other schools in preparing their students for their exams, which are always in the first half of May. They also spoke to athletics and the fact that there are a number of students who have fall activities, and maybe it's just not necessarily athletics, where they have to come back to school anyway, so they're already starting school. So there are a whole bunch of different factors, but I do really want to get the most robust sense of what the educators feel could potentially be the benefits of starting school. And to be clear, we're only talking about these 2 years. There's no decision that's being made potentially that's going to be beyond these 2 years, right? This is just for these two years. This is not a decision made in perpetuity.
We're putting forth 4 options that we discussed in front of the board. So this is not binding future boards. So we would ask that we either start, the board makes a determination to either start after Labor Day, before Labor Day, or the resolution for option number 3, which would be after Labor Day this year and before Labor Day for next year, or the potential option number 4, which would be both. But this is not looking out past 2 years.
Oh, okay, I had that.
Right, so it's just, and I think that's important to say again, it's just these 2 years that we're talking about.
It's a maximum of 2 years that we're asking the board
Right.
to make a decision on.
Right, and there'll be, I'm sure, some post-evaluation likely done to see, you know, if it was helpful. So,
Well, I was gonna go through the board.
yeah,
Do you wanna
I mean, I won't weigh in. I'd like to hear what everybody else on the committee has to say. I know I jokingly said option 4, but I do want to hear from everybody else, and then if you can come back for a consensus vote, that would be great.
Okay, we do want to save time for our middle school program of studies, so did you want to go with option 4 at this point? I don't know that we'll be able to go back through everybody.
I mean, I'm
again.
leaning that way, but I do want to, I
Okay.
think my decision would be more informed by hearing from fellow committee members.
Okay,
which would
we'll
include
allow
our-
you to change your mind,
Thank
but
you.
we'll put you down as
Not-
4
that's not
for now.
binding either,
Okay,
right?
correct.
Okay.
Anybody else have an opinion or comment?
Yeah, and
You want to hear from the
Yeah.
teacher first? Okay,
Yeah.
there's strong preference to hear from teacher and student, so throw it to you.
Well, I can give you both. As a parent, my kids always started school before Labor Day, and that worked very well. I liked that they had that time to get themselves acclimated, to get oriented, and they got right into it. As a teacher, I think it's great. I think that extra time, not just because of testing, but you have their focus much longer in the beginning of the year than in June. If you look at that, once PSSAs and all your tests are over in that May, you know, you have a block of time there at the end of the year. I think it was last year, 2 years ago, where we went to like June 23rd. I'm not sure if any of you got into a classroom for those last couple of weeks, but it was brutal. The kids are it's different. The kids are checked out. I feel that making this decision based on vacations is not really an option. Like when my kids were in school, as a parent, we planned around the school calendar. We didn't plan within the school calendar because that's what was important to us when they went to school. So from both sides as a parent and a teacher, and if you're asking me from a teacher, I think that time, we look at it, it's, everybody talks about it's 4 additional days, but those additional days earlier in the year are so much better than tacking anything on to the end of the year. So I'm a very big proponent of starting before Labor Day.
And
Yeah, thank you
Even for the in-service days, I feel that we get.
Okay. Are you representative, do you think, of the majority of your colleagues? Would they be willing to sacrifice staying, that summer till Labor Day
Students value
feeling?
that vacation a lot.
Oh.
I don't know.
Putting you on the spot.
I-
Okay.
I don't wanna
Fair
speak
enough.
for- I don't want to speak for everybody.
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
For what I do and working with the kids, I find that time much more valuable earlier in
Okay.
the school year than at the end.
Okay, thank you. And Jesse, how about student?
So I was just looking at this more from perspective of a kid. It'll be my senior year next year, and so I see we start on Monday, and we have a nice 4-day weekend to open the school year, and that's definitely a bonus. It's definitely better than staying in school till whatever the date was, like June 24th, 25th. Like, nobody wants to do that. So yes, I would rather come into school earlier than leave school later. And yeah, so that for a student and for me, I think that's like the only thing that really matters from our perspective. So.
And you think that is sort of the majority opinion of your fellow students, that
I mean, I feel like a lot of students would probably see like, oh, school's starting early, that's bad. But then they would like end school on June 23rd and 24th, and they'd be like, oh, starting school late is bad. So the average student doesn't like to be in school. But so I mean, I'm sorry.
You do know these meetings are recorded.
I mean, no, the average student loves to learn, but they don't like to be in school.
Oh, so well said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
So I will say that I think that it's more valuable at the beginning of the year.
Okay, thank you. Did you guys have any more questions or comments?
Yeah, so I actually sat on the calendar committee this last year, and I was supposed to be on it this year. They only met once, and I couldn't meet when they scheduled it. So I have to say I'm a little disappointed, though, because I know we talked about this last year and the issue of before versus after Labor Day. So I'm disappointed that it's come before the committee, and I don't judge because I know you guys had a lot on your plate so late, because I know people have already made summer vacation plans for this summer, for 2020. They've already booked homes, and I just think it's, this has been historically how it's always done in Radner. And people who are, have their finger on it, I actually had a couple people text me in the last 2 weeks, are we starting before Labor Day? I'm trying to make my vacation plans. And I'm like, I don't know, we haven't decided yet. So, I mean, I think that there will be people whose kids are going to miss the first week of school. And not because they're purposely flouting the school calendar, but because they made that plan based on what we've always done in Radner, even when Labor Day has been very late. I'm not averse to discussing it for the next school year, 2021, 2022, but I think that it's something we have to tell people further in advance and make sure that they're aware of it. Because I think that my guess is that a lot of the high school teachers are back anyway, like we said, for fall activities. My family has to be back because I have a kid in band and they start in August. But that doesn't mean that people who only have kids in elementary school, or that the elementary school teachers want to have to come back early. Now, I think they come back before Labor Day anyway, but coming back that much more before Labor Day does alter some people's family plans. And, a lot of people make those plans very far in advance because summer is such a limited part of the year. I feel like if this were something we wanted to do for the following school year, I don't know that we vote on it now, but maybe we make sure everybody knows we're talking about it and vote on it in September. So there's plenty of warning and everybody.
Okay.
But that's me personally. I mean,
That's important. So,
I also think, just as an aside, if people are really worried about getting out of school on time, I wouldn't have given us Easter Monday off. That's something we got rid of years ago. And, I didn't realize that was coming back up before the calendar committee. Last year when we talked about potentially adjusting when spring break was and not always tying it to Easter, because sometimes it falls at a very awkward time and we have a long stretch of time in school. So I was actually surprised to see that we were getting Easter Monday off now, because if the argument is having school, having days not in June, that's an easy way to keep the kids in school, a day earlier in the year. I gather that people travel, and I understand that, and that was why we put it back on.
Well, and I think that, I feel that you have the same thing at the end of the year. I feel that parents deal with camps and such, and there's a lot of kids that get pulled out when it goes that late at the end of the year.
No, yeah, and I understand that was why we started talking about
For that
it.
last week of school.
Right,
So I think
and
you
there
have
was a
that.
year that we ended up going longer than we expected to. The reason we built in the 4 days was because there was a year we ended up having to go, 2 years ago, I think, we went so long that there were high school students who had other plans and didn't end up taking the exams until August. So I gather there's a scheduling issue, but, you know, we're giving people a lot more notice about when the school year ends than when it starts, right? I mean, we're telling them when it'll end in June of 2021. So it's just a thought. I mean,
So am I hearing you correctly? You're either for option 1 or option 3?
option one is
After Labor Day.
is keep it after Labor Day for the coming school year.
Correct.
Because we haven't given the public enough notice, but I'd be open to it for 1 year. But that being said, my concern is that this is a slippery slope and it'll change every year going forward. I know that that's what's that everyone's saying that's not it. But if everybody else is starting before Labor Day every other year, I feel like we're going to end up doing that. And then we're going to end up starting in mid-August. The
Right.
teachers will, at least.
Right, so there is a difference. If we go with option 3, we are giving people notice that we're
Yeah,
going to
I
do
understand
that.
that.
Just so,
Yeah, and they have time to come and storm the
Okay.
barricades and tell us to change our minds.
so you're with, well,
Yeah, no, that's where, but I mean, it's going to come before the board next week and they'll decide there.
Andrew, well, we're going to put forth, I think
do we have
we're-
to
So I wanted to
Yeah.
just talk about the Easter Monday. So that is a teacher flex in service day, and so the fact that our teachers do conferences in
So it's actually
November, so
okay.
we have to have that day somewhere in here, and so that actually moved. We had it on the 23rd of December this current school year,
Right.
And when we met with the calendar committee, there was a robust discussion back and forth between, do we want it to have it December 23rd for 2020, or would we prefer to have it April 5th of 2021? And people felt that the majority of the community would appreciate it having, because you're tacking on the end of spring break, so you get Easter Monday, but you'd also get an additional day tacked on to spring break. So it is a.
Just, was that also to me, as to where teacher and service days fall, I actually care more about what the teachers feel. I know one of the reasons we moved it last year was because there was a feeling that the in-service days are more meaningful to teachers earlier in the school year. So we were trying to front load them to the first half of the school year. So I'm fine with it. I'm not going to argue about it for this year, but going forward, the reason we moved it, and I get that it's kind of difficult for teachers to have it right at the beginning of the Christmas holiday, but that was why, was that there was more meaningful learning done for teachers at the beginning of the school year, the same way we're saying it would be for students.
So it's actually, and I agree with you 100%. So this is actually a flex for them doing conferences, so there wouldn't be a professional development session on that day.
Okay, it's conferences, not in service. Okay.
I just want to clarify what you're looking for from the committee. Are you looking for us to come up with a majority opinion on which option for next week, or are we going to present all of these 3 or 4 options to the full board? What would you like the committee to do tonight?
So the administration has put forward, we're recommending option 3.
Okay.
So we would recommend option 3, which puts us after Labor Day next year based on the timing.
Okay.
I think Sarah mentioned it well, that when we had the committee meet last year, the committee met last year, and there wasn't a lot of momentum. There was some discussion about the committee about starting before Labor Day, but there wasn't a ton of momentum to do that. When the committee met this year, there was a lot more momentum looking at the next 2 years, how late Labor Day is to start, because of the lateness of Labor Day to start before. But there's also discussion about, are we giving our families enough notice? So based on giving our families enough notice is why we are recommending option 3, which, you know, gives us an opportunity to live and experience. Now, unfortunately for Jesse, I know as a senior, but gives us the, I won't tell you there is an added benefit to seniors, but I won't say that publicly. There's graduation, but we would have to move it a little later, but there is that date will get set once we set it. So that will be a benefit to you in a sense. But, you know, there is the reality that we would live a very late Labor Day starting after, and people would experience that. And the following year, we will start.
It's going to be super early.
No, the following year, it's another late Labor Day.
Oh, is it
and we would,
late
yeah,
2 years in a row? Okay.
Yes, oh yeah, it's actually, and it's even in 2021, we have additional holidays that are playing into the start of the
Right,
school year as
right,
well.
right.
So I think it makes it even more important to look at it that second
Okay.
year. And then we could experience that, and then we can have discussions about moving forward. The one thing I am hearing is that, people are concerned about this idea that this is a slippery slope, that all of a sudden we now are always going to be before Labor Day. We don't have to do that. That is not what we're recommending at this point. It is a reality, I can tell you, districts that move to before Labor Day, with the exception of, I think, Philadelphia. Philadelphia School District went before Labor Day a year or two ago.
And went
they
back.
had a nightmare. They had a heat wave. We had
Nightmare.
a heat wave and everything, and they went back to after Labor Day because of that. I know of, though, other districts that moved to after Labor Day, and then they just stayed that way because it worked well. So we're going to get a chance to experience both, and we can discuss what that means for us and how we want to move forward. Do we want to, in the future, set a date that says when Labor Day is beyond this date, we're going to start before Labor Day. When Labor Day is this date, we'll start after. I mean, we could create a cutoff, and that's a discussion we can have in the future. So the recommendation is
number 3.
is number 3,
Right, okay.
based on discussions with the committee. But this is something that we are open as administrative, where, all the points were good points. The good points for let's start before for both were good points. To continue after, there is a tradition, and we have been doing very well as a school district starting after Labor Day. So all those points are good points. We think, based on the committee and based on all the work, that option 3 would be the best moving
Okay,
forward.
all right. Andrew, I know you did have thoughts on it. Do you want to say them publicly? You don't have to. You can say you're done, and I'll say what, and we'll move on, because we're short on time.
3. Hey. 3. That's my comment.
Okay.
I mean, I
Great.
had kind of
Yeah,
decided
yeah,
that
yeah.
in our meeting.
Okay.
But
I'm not disclosing
I
anything.
had one other question that
Yeah,
I think.
wait,
is-
I also have just 2 things that haven't come up in this conversation yet. So we looked at this about 4 years ago, and we did a pretty comprehensive survey of the community. And we haven't talked about that at all in this meeting, but it came back definitively that people did not want to start before Labor Day. Now, it could be that the community's changed, and it could be that, whoever answered that survey is no longer in the district. That I can't speak to, but I do think you had an opinion on a committee that may or may not be representative of the community. But we had a data point that had a large number of responses that it was like, don't you dare take away our summer past Labor Day. And so I'm just putting that out there, that did occur, and, we do have that data point. The other thing I'm just curious about, and I see the academic reasons for this, and I actually support number 3, but I did want to know if there is any actual data on, did districts see progress, or did they see better results when they moved before Labor Day, or is it kind of, this is a subjective conversation? Do we actually know?
I don't have hard data as to, like, this district,
Yeah, okay.
moved from pre to post or post to pre, and this is the outcomes.
Okay, yeah.
It's hard, because as
Yeah.
districts, we do so many
There's
things
so many other
each year. There's
factors,
so many
yeah.
factors, so it's hard
It's
to point
a-
to one.
yeah.
I mean, there's the anecdotal to,
Yeah.
how students are at any given time of year and that experience. But
Amy, you had another?
Yeah, there was a question, if you could just clarify the sports aspect. I know that a couple people had asked about how this could potentially impact on sports. And I don't think they were clear that, I think I've learned that PIAA sets the practice date, but I'm not sure everybody's aware of that. So is there anything you can illuminate that way?
Yeah, so if you look at both the before Labor Day calendar, or you could look at the after Labor Day calendar, in the center column at the second from top, August 17th, that is the date that PIAA high school sports begin. So each year, the PIAA sets the start date for practices, and so we already know that. So we will have any student that is participating in fall sports here, August 17th in 2020-2021 school year.
Just to share, I mean, we had a conversation about this in our planning meeting you know, at the secondary level, what was, I mean, over 50% of kids are involved in some kind of sport, or, you know, you were alluding to it earlier, band activities, so at the high school level, yeah, secondary level.
Yeah, so it's just really high school kids that
Yeah.
have to be here. And I think band does not.
No, band does.
Band moves, well, but they move 10 days before the start. So
Oh, yeah.
they're going to go 10 days before when we start. So that isn't, but the sports people definitely, theirs is fixed no matter what.
So I actually have a question, and you probably don't know the answer, and you may not be able to get it for next week, but if you could try. You know, our students don't just attend our schools. They attend the community college, they attend the VOTEC, and they have DCIU services. Would you be able to make sure for next week that we have answers about, especially because it may still come up that people want to move next year's as well,
Yeah.
whether, you know, all those extra services will shift to align if all the Delaware County schools are shifting, or if we'll still be, you know, if there'll be some misalignment among services that are available and other programs that our kids are involved in?
I think that's
'Cause
why
that's
we
relevant from a
always
busing
matched.
standpoint,
I think
et
that's
cetera.
why we traditionally always matched the DCIU calendar, was because then students who, in a family who are both.
Well, but if enough of the Delaware County schools are shifting, DCIU may shift, and then we may be left out in the cold,
Yeah.
so that's relevant too.
I have a feeling it's going to be a mixed bag next year, but I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but, all right, so.
I think that personally we'll know more by next week. I have a couple school boards, William Penn,
We'll already
Garnet, Wallingford, not Garnet, Wallingford. They're all having these conversations this week, just like we are. So by next week, you could have a lot more indication of where Delaware County as a whole is going. I just want to be clear, though, about option number 3. How I read that is, because it contradicts a little bit what Sarah raised earlier. It says, if we do go with option 3, we're committing now. We're not waiting till September. We're committing now to a pre-Labor Day start for 2021, 2022.
No, for 21, 22, not 2021.
I said, I know it's
Okay.
confusing with all the 20s, but I'm talking about the fall 21 school year. We will be committing, if we vote on this, we will be committing next week to start that before Labor Day as of that vote, not waiting till September. The only thing I would ask, perhaps, to Sarah's point and what some others have raised, is to take a look maybe at the way Garnet Valley illustrated their rationale for why they made this decision. I thought it was really well laid out, and I'm, like I alluded to earlier in the math conversation, rationale sometimes goes a long way to heading off questions or concerns. So I would just ask, maybe that's it, instead of just announcing it, to put out a thoughtful letter like that explaining why we made this decision.
As a rule of thumb, we usually don't like to put out thoughtful letters or communicate, so, yes, of course, we would do that. That would be no problem.
Okay. Paul and Jesse has some.
I have a question, or I guess a notice. I think while option 3 is a good compromise, I think that if you start the school year after Labor Day for next year, and then before Labor Day the year after that, this like precious summertime that people hold so dear will just get shrunk by like 2 weeks, is it? Like significantly more. And so I think that
That's a good point.
that should also be taken into account, because if we're holding people's like summer as a real like consideration in the school year, then I think that should also like be taken into account, because that is significantly limiting summer time.
So you're arguing for option
I
1?
hear what you're saying.
No, I'm
No,
arguing
he's
for
opting for option 4.
I'm changing my vote.
Yes, but
I'm a
he's making me
4 too.
switch my vote to 1.
I'm a 4.
Okay.
I think you got 2 votes
All
for
right.
4, maybe 3 votes for 4.
Thank you. That actually was a really clever point, Jesse. I'm going to move the conversation now on, because we want to have time for the middle school program of studies.
But seriously, would 3 and 4 be a possibility for next week to present, or is it just going to be option 3?
I don't support, I'm going to go with what they originally said, but let them talk about it.
Ken is
Well,
about to
give them
say
time to
something.
talk about it.
Go ahead, Ken.
No, I mean, all options are still on the table, and that certainly is fine for a discussion with the full board. All options, that's fine.
At this time, I will call up middle school principal Dr. Weidlich to go and speak about the middle school program of studies.
Everybody's going in next week, so.
Welcome,
Hello.
Dr. Weidlich.
Hi.
Hello
Hi,
there.
hi.
Oh, okay.
Not exactly sure, like, where, it's my first
Oh.
time presenting, for the district, so I'm not exactly sure of the protocol, the rhyme or reason of how you'd like me to start.
Okay.
Well, we can go ahead and just have you begin. We'll start with the electives, and you can talk a little bit about the contemporary writing elective and some of the changes that you made on the labs and the essentials classes.
Okay. So within your packets, you'll see an addition of the following courses handout, I believe. And what this does is, in working with Dr. Bryan and Dr. Kent, we spent a lot of time going through these additions. And we're starting with the 8th grade contemporary writing course. So as a result of the middle level review, where one of the components of the middle level review was about adding student choice and providing more electives. We wanted to start small this year. This being my first year, one of the targeted areas that I feel that we need to not work towards, but work with kids on who have that knack and have that passion for writing is additional writing elected. As of right now, we have a 1-period English class, and we do have students who just have that, like I said, that passion and that interest in continuing it in various genres of writing, not just informational writing, but creative writing, research writing, really using their voice and identifying character and so on and so forth. So this is a class that we are looking to add. It is 4 times in a cycle, so it would fall under the traditional elective cycle where kids would be able to elect this course, and this would be for 8th grade only for the 2020-2021 school year. The next class, it is kind of in response to, not in response, but it goes hand in hand with the math, with Dr. Kearney when he was explaining the progression of math for the middle school. One of the areas that, in talking with Dr. Bryan and talking to Dr. Kent and talking with the vertical team, as well as all math teachers, is as of right now, in terms of general education interventions for mathematics, we only have a course that's called Preview Review. And I don't want to say we only have, because kids make great progress. But in the MTSS realm, in response to instruction and intervention, we don't have anything greater than this preview review. And the course actually is exactly what it says. They're previewing general ed material, they're reviewing general ed material, but there's really nothing there to address gaps. So the Math for Understanding is a class that we'd like to offer up to 4 times a cycle based on student need. In 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. In taking a look at some targeted numbers for our current 8th grade students who are in pre-teach, reteach, and talking with the teachers and looking at some soft data, it looks as though of the overall 8th grade students who are in general education mathematics, about 3 to 4% of the kids would what we consider qualify for an intervention as such. So just like all Tier 3 interventions, it is a very targeted population. And the design is not for the kids to be in this class for the entire year. Our goal with any intervention is to make sure that students are getting what they need when they need it, and then instead of just resonating in that class, they get what they need and then they get out and then they get to go matriculate back into the traditional elective cycle. The next couple of classes, as you're going to see, they end with the word lab. One of the things that we're looking to do here at Radnor Middle School is we've always had the supports for our students. So if there is a need, we have supports that are ready for our kids. But what we're looking to do is we're looking to realign, I don't want to say redesign, but realign and streamline our intervention process. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to separate our special education interventions from our general education interventions. And in doing so, we'd like to add 3 new classes for the 2020-2021 school year. One, we have Math Lab, and our Math Lab would be our most intensive mathematics intervention for students who have identified needs in the area of mathematics. The second course that we were looking to add is a Writing Lab. As you see that the course number ends in 4, that means that the students would meet up to 4 times out of 8 days in our traditional cycle, and there students would be identified with having needs in the area of writing, and they had received targeted instruction within that course. The next class would be our executive functioning lab, and this is available similar to our other classes that end in the word lab for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Now, the executive functioning, the frequencies are varied based on student need, or they would be based on student need from 2, 4 to 6 times out of an 8-day cycle. And this executive functioning lab, of course, would be designed for students with targeted needs in the area of any facet of executive functioning. On the next page, we're talking a little bit about revisions, and going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier about redesigning or reconfiguring or streamlining our processes. What we're looking to do is we're looking to really fine-tune our MTSS process, our multi-tiered system of supports. And at Radnor Middle School, that is a framework that we utilize to provide scaffolded, fluid support to students in need, really focusing on the whole child. It is a standards-aligned program. It is comprehensive, and it's really for enhancing the academic, behavioral, and social-emotional needs of all of our students. And if you are familiar, the MTSS process is based on 3 tiers, with Tier 1 being considered universal interventions, meaning that is the largest component of our population receiving those interventions. For an example, mathematics. I don't say intervention, but mathematics. About 90% of our students are receiving general education mathematics, and so that is something that more along the lines, it refers to high quality instruction that's provided to all students in the general ed setting. Tier 2, and there are some examples of some Tier 1 classes, Tier 2 classes on this infographic. It refers to interventions that are provided to students in a much smaller setting, where these interventions are more targeted, at least more targeted than what they're receiving in Tier 1. And I do have some examples. And the percent of population that we're talking about is about anywhere between 10 to 15% of the population, the gen ed population, would receive Tier 2 interventions. Tier 3 would be our most intensive general ed intervention, and that refers to interventions that are provided to individual students, and you're looking at anywhere between 1 to 5. Now, the most important thing that I feel that it's very important to state is that students are not going to be pigeonholed to these specific interventions for the year. All right, again, we want them fluid, similar to someone going to the doctor. They need a prescription. The prescription's not lifelong. It's not year-long. It's something temporary to address, and then you get moving. And by no means are any of these tiers replacing the Tier 1. Okay, so these are going to be in addition. So if a general ed student's receiving, they're in a general ed math setting, they may just need some additional support, again, in addition to what they're receiving in Tier 1. So right now, we're looking to we're looking to revise our Writing Essentials class. The revision is based on the course number, and the last number in each of these course numbers is either going to be 2 or 4, and that's based on frequency. Progress will be monitored, and course frequency will be adjusted, and students can they can exit when they meet specific goals. Everything within that class in terms of criteria for entrance would be based on relative data. The next one is our Academic Success Center, looking to change the course number, and things are ending in the letter A. This is a 2 times a cycle, or considered a Tier 2 intervention for general ed students who just need support with organization and study skills, or they just need reinforcement of different types of things that fall under the executive functioning umbrella. Math preview review, it's something that we already have within our program of studies, and that we're already utilizing within the middle school. I'm just looking to change the number again to reflect frequency based on student need. And life strategies, it's a class that we already have within our course of studies. Again, I'm just looking to change the course number, where the last number is addressing the frequency from 2 times, 4 times, 6 times, or 8 times. I hope I'm not being confusing when I'm talking about that. So they are the changes that we are looking to bring to Radnor Middle School. We do want to start small. One of my entry goals was to really reaffirm and realign our MTSS process to continue to do what's best for kids. And from the administrative perspective, from the team that I work along with every single day, this is the best way to do it, at least for the upcoming year.
All right, thank you very much. My apologies for not introducing you.
Oh, hi.
For the people at home, this is our middle school principal, Dr. David Weidlich.
It's a good day. I didn't cough all the way through it, so we're good.
My mistake. Thank you very much for presenting that. I just want to stress that we've done this in the same way that we've done the high school program of studies, where we're really just discussing classes that are up for changes in the program of studies. The rest of it will remain as it was before. So with that, specific questions, yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Hi.
It's done.
So I actually have a question, and it's just actually kind of a structural one, because I think it's something a lot of parents don't necessarily think about if this isn't. So the writing elective, I understand. You're taking that instead of taking a tech ed design class in 8th grade, or taking a fax class or art or something. So that's purely elective. The other classes, the labs, and then the other essentials that you're looking to change. Let me give you an example so you understand where my brain is. When my daughter was in 6th grade, she took an instrument, and at that time, the way the scheduling worked, in order to go for her lesson, she got yanked out of another class, and she came home crying on multiple occasions when she got yanked out of the math prep class for her next day's test because she had to go for a lesson. And as a result, she actually quit her instrument because she was so upset about how that worked. She doesn't watch these, so I won't hear about it at home. But
I'll tell her.
Shoot.
She's back in band.
She's back in band, so we're good. But so my question is, these students, especially if they're if we're focusing on them because they have an academic need, they may have other academic needs. So if we have a student who goes from 4 times a cycle to 6 times a cycle in a lab, what are they missing? And conversely, if we drop them from 6 to 4, what are they picking back up?
Right. So the middle level schedule it's a pretty
Challenging.
It's a daunting schedule, and,
Yeah.
and it's just like it's a little more, from my perspective, it's a little more daunting than a high school schedule because we're dealing with teaming, we're dealing with different types of interventions, we're dealing with different types of introductory classes from music to art, and so on
Right.
and so on. So let's take the MTSS model right now. So everyone's receiving Tier 1 in their general education classroom. So our Tier 2 will be our least intensive classes for students who do not have identified needs through, let's say, an IEP. Students would receive that minimal, I don't say minimal, but they would receive the least amount of support from what we're offering in addition to the Tier 1 during their advisory period.
Okay.
So we're looking it's about 35 minutes of a general ed intervention. And again, that's really just targeted support that's designed to meet the student where he or she is at, provide what they need, and I don't mean to say get them out, but then get them back to what they need to do. If it does increase beyond that, it's kind of like, fitting a, round block in a or something. What's the thing? Square peg in a round hole, or what have you, right? So you have to be as creative as possible. So one of the things that I've always prided myself in is ensuring that all of our students are receiving as much exposure to our electives as possible, not just here, but also in my former district. Does that mean that a 6th grade student is going to receive everything that a student without intervention would receive in 1 year? Probably not, because we're looking at the individual child. But with that being said, if a student does need 4 times support, and that would take the place of an elective, because again, we want to make sure that we're meeting their need. All right, I want to do my best, and the counselors do their best, and my counterparts, Dr. Kent and Dr. Bryan, would do all of our best to make sure that student, before they leave Radnor Middle School, is receiving some sort of formal instruction within that specific area. Again, going back to what I was saying, it's not something that's going to pigeonhole the kids in there for the entire year. So we want to be fluid. So a student might come in at 2 times and might have some additional needs that we're seeing. We might increase it to 4. During the marking period, we're attacking what we need to do. We're progress monitoring. We're providing feedback. Parents part of the discussion. We reduce it to 2. Do you know what I mean? So it's one of those. There's not a definitive answer that I can give you. The only thing that I could tell you is that if it was to take the place of an elective, let's say in 6th grade or 7th grade, and let's say hypothetically it's family consumer science, I'll make sure that that student has exposure to family consumer sciences before they leave the middle school.
So there's that, but it sounds to me, and I just want to reassure people, because especially when you're a parent of a 6th grader, first time, people don't always know how the scheduling works. If your child is going to be getting supports that take them out beyond the advisory period,
Right.
the district, you or your team is specifically going to involve the parent. The parent's going to understand that the child is missing some other
That's
class
just,
of some sort.
you're absolutely right, and that's just best administrative practice.
It is
I
best
mean,
practice.
no matter
It wasn't
what.
at one point,
N-
so I
but no matter
appreciate
what,
it.
kids should be, not just, students, parents, teachers. It should be a comprehensive decision. By no means is that just a decision made by
So parents
myself.
will,
Absolutely.
this isn't something we need to worry about as much because you're going to make sure that the parents who are affected are very
Right.
aware of it.
And my thought process behind that is, your child better than anybody. So we're seeing
Right,
them
so the
for.
parent could say to you, no, gosh, please don't take them out of
Absolute-
facts. That's the one thing
yes.
they look forward to in a
Absolutely.
week. Could
And
they
I-
skip language arts for this, or not language arts,
But
but
I know,
an elective language or something?
absolutely,
Perfect.
yes.
Great.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Andrew, any comments, observations?
I mean, I just want to make a couple quick comments, just following up with, just trailing off from what you were saying. From our conversation, it seems like the parents are always part of it, that it's, you're making these decisions with data, recommendations, parental input, so that was a note that I made. But, just generally speaking, I mean, this response to intervention approach is a standard approach. I mean, this is just for anyone who, but it's a standard approach. It's something that has been very popular now for probably a generation, and there's all kinds of really good data and case studies about how to apply it, how to apply the framework well. I was just very impressed and very encouraged in talking with you and the team about your plans for applying this and this going forward. I mean, it just sounds like our kids are in great hands. I mean, this is great. Very appreciative of it.
All right. Ms. Goldman?
I just had two questions. One is in the special education courses, and we're lucky to have a special education teacher here, actually. It works out well. Do you find that there's an overlap potentially? You have the spot on your back now. I'm moving it along. Do you find that there's overlap between potentially executive functioning lab needs for students and life strategies needs? And if that's the case, how does that work on a schedule?
So do you mean like students needing both?
Yes.
Both support?
Yeah.
And I don't think I have a clear-cut answer for you, to be very honest with you. I know that we do have students who have who do have life strategies at the course. They do have needs that would qualify them for take this course, and they also have executive functioning needs. But because executive functioning is for the most part, it is a tier 1 intervention as well. I mean, that's something that we're looking to have ingrained in all curricular areas. That's something. There are some specific skills that Mrs. McMenamin would be teaching that fall under the executive functioning umbrella within that life strategies course.
Mm-hmm.
If they become more intensive and there's a more targeted need that we're seeing, then that's something that we reconvene as a team. Any time a special education decision is being made, we're going to reconvene as a team. And the other thing is we want to take into account what's best for the whole child.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so you might have a student who has several different types of supports. We want to take a look at the social emotional aspect of having all of those supports, because sometimes we have to do a very good job of balancing.
Right, because it might be those very students who need to have that time in their schedule. I mean, I know that for a while that happened at the high school when we were doing Keystone remediation, where kids were in so much remediation for 3 different Keystone exams. They were the very kids who needed the electives, and they
Right.
were locked out of them. So I imagine that goes into your thinking, is to be able to provide a schedule that also includes balance for things that will provide some relief above and beyond the skill building that
Right.
they really need.
I mean, ultimately, we want kids to enjoy coming to school, and we have a multifaceted job. I mean, we need to make sure that we're doing what's best for kids academically, but we also need to make sure we're doing what's best for them social and emotionally. So, of course, that's something that we will.
And when you make a shift like this, I guess it goes without saying that then potentially has an impact on a transition, especially since, I don't know if these are, I forget if they're just 8th grade interventions, but if for 8th graders, if, with these added courses, how that impacts on their planning for high school.
Right.
So those conversations happen at the same time.
Yeah, and so my experience in any middle level, but even specifically here, I know that our 8th grade learning support teachers do a tremendous job in working with the high school and a lot of the learning support teachers there in making sure that that transition is seamless. I've worked closely with PT and her team to make sure that this transition is seamless because, I mean, both hands should be talking to each other. So if we see a student who has a decreased need, but is in an executive functioning course and it comes time to course selection, that's something that the case manager would help that student navigate, but then also relay that information to a probable or a possible case manager. I know our school counseling departments are in lockstep with one another in terms of communication as well, so.
But I also see it more as like, as you build in new courses, that could inform how the program of studies is developed.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Not just an
misunderstood.
individual student, but how the whole program of studies looks at the next level.
Right.
From elementary to middle and middle to high school, building those courses, I imagine often they can't be done in a vacuum. There's going to be an effect on either end of the continuum as well in terms of what that program will look like.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood what, so you are correct. So I know that for next year, the high school administrative team, they did present an executive functioning class that is granted, we're meeting the needs of middle school kids and they're meeting the needs of high school kids, but it is a streamlined intervention class. I know that they also have math interventions and writing interventions. Again, we're just looking to streamline that secondary process, starting here at the middle level.
Okay, great, thank you.
Teacher and student comments on this?
All good on this one.
Okay. You didn't even turn your microphone on, so I trust you on that. All right. You're good. Okay. I want to thank you for this. This is a relatively new document, and I want to thank everyone who proofed it and edited it. It's in really nice shape, so I appreciate that.
I'd just like to thank Dr. Wadlick and his whole team. I mean, they've really done feels like it hasn't even been a full year. And, all the things that you've been involved in and looking at our program, the suggestions you're putting forward here to improve the program, your collaboration with the other administrators, both at the high school and the elementary level. Just thank you for everything that you've been doing.
Thank you.
All right. Where are we? Instructional calendar, middle school program of studies. That brings us to any new business? Committee members, that's a no, right? Is there any public comment at this time? All right, seeing none, that concludes our committee meeting for January. We will, I believe, meet on the third Tuesday in February.